As organizations continue to grow in complexity through the adoption of new technologies, automation, and growing ecosystems, so does the cyber landscape. The benefits of these advancements are enormous, but with that comes increasing vulnerabilities and risk, and new access points to lure threat actors in. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory's Cyber Risk Services practice. Today, I'll be talking to Meredith Harper, Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Eli Lilly, and I couldn't be more excited. In this episode, Meredith digs into the complexity of cyber and pharmaceuticals and also some of the challenges that CISOs are facing across industries, such as the digital world, automation, and our growing ecosystem and cyber footprint, to include all things people, process, and technology.
Really, what I believe the new age CISO should be focusing their energy on, as well as myself, is how do we look at the people impact? How do we look at the systems that they're using, but there's a person who is using that system? How do we look at the processes that need to be in place in order for us to have consistency and compliance, if you will? And then we start to look at how do we layer technology to enable our business and drive us to the future.
She also provides insight into what it takes to be a resilient leader and how to drive cyber change throughout an organization. Meredith is truly such an amazing woman, and to be able to spend time with her today so that our listeners can understand not only her career, but also her passion, which includes singing and her passion for people. It truly resonates in the conversation, and it's incredibly inspirational to hear how she manages to find time to not only give back to her community, but to also mold the next generation of leaders. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Meredith. So without further ado, Meredith Harper. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, Meredith. I am so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And before we dive into all the exciting things that we're going to talk about today, I hear that I've got to talk to you or ask you about maybe your singing background.
Yes, I'm a singer, very passionate about it.
And maybe you can provide a little bit of context for our listeners. How did you get into it? Did you grow up singing? Where did that journey start?
It came from my mom and dad. My mom and dad are both musical. They were singers, they played instruments, and so music was always a part of our household growing up. And being very rooted in the church, we sang in church choirs. We did background vocals for gospel artists. I've even done studio work for various gospel artists as well, and sang in some community choirs. So it's always been a part of my makeup, actually, from the time I was a kid until now. So I
I
love it
love
very
it.
much. Yeah.
I love it. I think next time we're going to have a snippet of you singing. So for all of our listeners, I mean, feel free to come back, or maybe we'll have Meredith sing some bars there.
Oh my gosh.
I love that. And so if we think about people who have helped to influence you in your life, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about
Mhm,
your parents. Do you maybe talk a little bit about you have such a great reputation of
mhm,
helping women and minorities launch their careers and be
mhm,
incredibly supportive and empowering. Maybe
mhm.
you could talk a little bit about, who's done that for you in your journey.
Yeah, it's been interesting as I look back over not only my professional career, but just growing up, because a lot of this really starts when you're young. I think that, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and lived in an area that was not, I want to say, the best area of the city. And so it had its challenges like any other major city. But I had some really great educators. So when I think about my principals from elementary school and my parents choosing to send me and my brother to a school for gifted kids when we got to middle school, and being able to go to Cass Technical High School, which is a high school that you had to actually test to get into. All along that journey, I had educators who decided that they were going to invest in me as a student, and even just as a young woman growing up and trying to find my way. So it's been a varying amount of people who've done that. And then as I see myself moving into my educational career at the college level, I've had various professors that have really stoked those fires and helped me to really move myself forward and learn different things. And I think about one pretty pivotal person when I was in grad school at the University of Detroit Mercy, and I had Sister Mary Kelly. And I always have to tell this story about this phenomenal woman. She was one of the sisters there on the campus, and she was also the director over their health services program. And I was a consultant at the time, traveling with my job, and couldn't always be in class because I was on the road and things of that nature. And this beautiful woman would sometimes go to my classes and tape the lectures for me because, that was around the time before a lot of internet. we didn't have a lot of we didn't have a lot of email, things of that nature. And she would tape these lectures and she would FedEx them to my hotel, so I could hear the lectures. And when I came home on the weekends, she would proctor my exams over the weekend so I could still keep my courses moving forward. And I've always told that story to people that there's always someone who takes an interest in you. And she took an interest in me in a way where she wanted me to be successful and wanted me to be able to get through this program. And I definitely would not have graduated from that program without her help and assistance. So I think she was the one that really catapulted me educationally at that level, which I thought was amazing for her to do that.
Very inspiring. And I
Mhm,
guess from that and what you've learned around that, how do
mhm,
you then take that and help mold the next generation of leaders? We now
yeah.
obviously have texting, tweeting, internet, and certainly I know the takeaway. And as I'm jotting notes down as you're talking,
Yeah,
obviously taking an interest in others and
sure,
helping people move forward. So how do you help
sure.
continue that journey?
Well, I think growing up, I was always taught that we're never on this journey by ourselves. We either are going to bring people with us or someone is going to propel us forward. So I've always taken that as a part of my calling. I do see my profession as that, especially because I'm a double minority in a space where you typically don't see people who look like me. So I think it's my responsibility to be able to show young girls, other young brown girls who are interested in technology or interested in science or math, that you could be this one day. Because I didn't have that. Walking into my career, I didn't see people who look like me. I didn't even see other women, to be honest, at that time. And so for me, I have tried to say that at least giving someone exposure to me may be the spark that they need in order to know that they could do the very same things or even greater things than what I've done. So I feel it's a part of my responsibility to sit in this seat, that I have to expose others to the possibilities of what they could be when they grow up. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. That's not a so that's not necessarily a put down at all. But I think that, again, exposure is a lot of things, especially for the kids these days. Them being able to see someone who looks like them is very important, because again, it removes the barriers for them. So absolutely, it's a part of my calling. I try to infuse that by being a mentor to many. I can't even count probably the number of mentees that I have. I make myself available, and I'm going to say this, it's kind of interesting what I have watched over the years. I became a vice president when I was 32 years old for the first time, and throughout these years, I've tried to always be accessible, regardless of what level I'm on. I want to be accessible to people, but I'm finding that folks are shocked that I would actually take the time, that I would actually make the effort if they reach out to me on LinkedIn and they want to talk about their careers. I've actually had conversations with complete strangers because they saw something in my profile that made them want to ask more questions. And so again, accessibility is key. And I think that we all have a responsibility as we traverse these careers and move through them, to be able to make sure that someone else is carried along. Because the reality of it is, I will retire, right? I will not be doing this forever. And the hope is that we are creating that next generation of bright young men and women who want to move into these spaces. And specifically for me, for African American women who want to move into these spaces.
Yeah, and it's intriguing as I listen to you and obviously share your passion. And I actually am also at times dumbfounded by the shock that people have when you're accessible. And
Mhm,
also, I mean, and I can just in the moments we've been talking, and obviously we've talked before this, but your transparency and being authentic self certainly
mhm,
resonates. And I think
mhm,
when people can hear that and recognize that you truly are not only passionate about what your mission is, but also in helping
mhm,
others, it comes across. And again, I'm hopeful that the mentorship that you're providing to others, I know people are
mhm.
probably grasping onto it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, how do I keep moving
Yeah,
it forward? Because
yeah,
again, it's truly, it resonates with me, and some of the things that I do as well, and I'm sure it's resonating with our
mm,
listeners who hear the passion come from your voice, and certainly hear the transparency that you provide. And so maybe with a little bit of that transparency. Your journey, I'm sure, has had, like any of ours, challenges along the way.
Mhm.
And I always tell people to not be afraid of failure. I think we
Of
often don't
course.
talk enough about
Mhm.
failing as part of our
Mhm.
journey and something that we need to do to be able to learn. And so maybe you could touch a little bit on failure and what that means for you.
Yes. Failure is a part of the learning process, right? It's a part of the journey. And I'm one that I have over the years. I can say when I first started out, I might not have been as comfortable with failure. But luckily, I've had some really great leaders who have given us space and opportunity to take calculated risk, which in some instances did result in some failures, but there were learnings that came out of that as well. But I think about a story that I had happened to me. And sometimes you can be very mixed in all of the activities that you have going on. You might be stretched in different ways and capacities, and something might get missed. Something might fall through the cracks. And in this particular scenario, I messed up. I really did. And I do tell people this story because people have to understand that you will have these times. But then again, how do you fix it? And in this particular scenario, I missed the opportunity to share with my CEO a critical message that I delivered to the board without letting her know before I delivered it to the board. And you could not have told me that I didn't tell her. I thought that I had already informed her about it. But I think that with all of the things that I was working on that particular week, and I was kind of pulled in all these different directions, I wasn't slowing down enough to make sure that I had all of my ducks in a row. I got into this board meeting in all of my glory and started to share about something, and I'm looking at her face, and I knew immediately that she had no idea what I was talking about.
Mm.
No idea. So I wrapped that up. Of course, the board didn't realize what was happening, but I wrapped that up and went back to my office, and I'm rifling through my emails and trying to figure out, like, did I tell her this? Or she just, her facial expressions let me know that I didn't. And she called me up to her office, and so I'm walking the hall of death, if you will. I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my God, am I going to lose my job? And think about it, I'm a vice president at this point. So who would have thought that a vice president would make this kind of mistake? But we're human, right? And
Yes.
so I'm walking down the aisle and or the hallway, and I get to her office and I sit down, and she has this look on her face, and so she asked a few questions, and pretty stern, and she's asked a few questions, and we're kind of talking it through, and then all of a sudden her whole demeanor changed. And it was such a great lesson. Her whole demeanor changed. And she started to share with me a time when she made a similar mistake. And at that moment, I felt, okay, this is what this really is about in terms of helping people traverse through these cycles of leadership, allowing them to again sometimes have those failures, but also help them to understand that they're not alone in this. I wasn't the first vice president to ever forget to tell someone something. She wasn't the first CEO that might have forgotten to do something. And so her sharing that story with me, number one, gave me a little bit of relief. Because I felt like she
Everyone's
understood.
human. Yeah.
Everybody's human. But again, just kind of talking it through with her, and understanding this woman that I have such respect for has had very similar situations that have happened to her, and she was able to overcome that and become this amazing CEO and amazing leader. And then once we got done, she hugged me and she said, okay, so we're going to put some things in place where this won't happen again. So she made sure that we corrected the problem, but she also gave me that space to be able to grow through that. So and those instances I thought was very valuable to me. So mistakes happen, and I try to tell my team that I'm okay with us taking calculated risks. Sometimes we will make those mistakes, and sometimes they might be uncalculated, and we're going to make those mistakes. But we always have to walk back into the scenario, thinking about how do we fix it, how do we adjust it, but most of all, how do we learn from it, and giving people that ability to grow past that, having short memories. I do not have a very long memory when it comes to these things, because you have to allow people to turn into the best versions of themselves, which means they're going to fail from time to time. But it's a part of the journey.
I I'm literally allowing people to turn into their best version of themselves.
Yes.
Love it.
Mhm.
And I'll shift gears a little bit as I look back at your career,
Mhm.
and you've had lots of different experiences. But there
Mhm.
seems to be a common thread around, we'll talk about industry for a minute, life sciences and
Mhm.
healthcare. Did you
Mhm.
know that you always wanted to work in life sciences, healthcare? Did it just come along as you were evolving in these different vantage points of your journey? What's
Mhm.
drawing you kind of to that life sciences, healthcare arena?
So interesting enough, I wanted to be an architect all of my life. Being a young girl, I was very creative. I wanted to draw. I wanted to look at art, and we would do all the museums and all that type of stuff. And so I actually, leading into college, at getting my bachelor's degree, I actually went through architecture school. So for 3 years, I was in architecture school and was convinced that I wanted to be an architect. What was interesting is that I got to my junior year and I made this decision that, you know what, I don't know if I really like the art of drawing more so than I like the art of creating and solving problems. So I decided to switch my major in my junior year. My parents thought I was absolutely nuts and they're I'm about to graduate in 2 years from architecture school. I have a master's degree in architecture, and they just thought I was absolutely nuts. And this was the time when we were starting to do computer-aided design, so we were
Mm.
getting computers, pretty much meshed into what we were doing from a design perspective. And so the great thing is they allowed me to transfer all of those classes into the, School of, Business, where I got my computer information systems degree and focused on software production and management. So I was able to still create because that's what I was passionate about. Whether I was solving a design problem or whether I was solving a business problem, the passion for me was around the problem solving piece, not necessarily in what arena I was doing it in. So once I graduated from college, I got this job in Ann Arbor, Michigan for a really wonderful company. And it was a healthcare IT company that actually created software products for the healthcare industry. I knew absolutely nothing about healthcare. Absolutely nothing. But I was a technical girl. I was a programmer and I was going to get in here and do these great things. But I figured out very quickly within the first, I want to say, couple of months of me working that I want to know more about this industry that creating these products for. And so, why don't I go back to school? I decided to go and get this degree in health services administration so I could kind of marry my technical side with the operations and the administration of healthcare, just so I can design products better. And I found myself as I moved from job to job and company to company, I never could get myself out of the healthcare space. So I'm now 26 years later still within some level of health IT, whether it's on the now life sciences side, but I've spent many, many years on the payer provider side of healthcare, many years for consulting companies that focused in healthcare. So it's always been this healthcare spin. And so what I have found is that I have a passion to help people. And even though I would not be in the ORs, I am not a surgeon, I am not a doctor, but the work that we do in our space is us taking care of patients. I might not touch them, but if I don't do my job effectively, those people who are blessed to do that role won't be able to do it effectively. So in essence, I'm taking care of patients. And so I like to work for an industry where I feel like I have a higher purpose, where again, you're helping people. I'm making a connection with people in the way that I can make a connection. So that's forced me, and not only say forced me, it encouraged me to stay in this arena, even though I've had opportunity to leave it. I just can't find myself working for a company where I can't see the everyday impact of what we do.
Again, I'm awe inspired as I'm listening, and I'm gonna use that as a good way for us to transition into shopping,
Mhm,
talking a little bit of shop right now. But I would also
mhm,
be remiss if I didn't also highlight for our listeners that you also studied not only, obviously your background in information systems, but you did
mhm.
it also receive a master's in health law. So, I mean, when you
Yes,
talk about understanding health and the implications of health in products and
yes,
solutions and industry, you really, leveraged, tying all the way back to the beginning of how
yes.
education has helped you with your journey.
Sure.
Having that health law master's degree, I'm sure, has
Mhm.
also helped you understand the mechanics of the legal system and the implications for the health
Yeah.
industry.
Well, it absolutely has. So when we think about back in 2000, we made it through Y2K. The world didn't blow up like we thought it would. The systems were still moving and working, and we did great remediation there to get prepared for that. And we were thinking about what is the next big thing that is going to hit the healthcare industry. And if you think back to that time, HIPAA was the next big thing. So here we are with this law that says that we now have to enact these privacy protections, and like, what do we do with that? We have no idea. And so I think that's when my career took a turn into how technology, healthcare operations, and law converge. And so here's how these three things now converge. And we have to have respect for all three of those things when we're operating and building these programs future forward. So, whether it's the privacy rules that have come out, whether it's the security rules that have come out, whether it's high tech that has come out, all of these legal elements are driving what we choose to build from a program perspective. So, the reason why getting that master's of jurisprudence was important to me is because I like the intersection of those three things and wanted to make sure that I understood how particular laws are impacting our everyday operations. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to go ahead and obtain that degree.
I like how you're just like, and so I decided to go ahead. I mean, it's impressive, right? So when I think about, I mean, like I like to believe that I'm a driver, but I didn't wake up one day and be like, I'm going to go figure this out with a
Yeah,
law degree and understanding more health law. So again, it's
yes,
quite impressive. So
thank
kudos,
you.
kudos to you for running down that path. And I guess
Yeah.
part of that is then, when you think about, as a vice president and CISO, what are your biggest priorities, given that amazing and candidly myriad of
Mhm,
background that you bring to the table. So it's probably
mhm,
also influenced how you look at the priorities that you have for the role that you
mhm.
play at Eli Lilly.
It absolutely does, and I think that I'm going to go back to the premise that I started with. It's all about people, right? So what we do, whether it's a patient that I'm connected to, whether it's someone who works for Eli Lilly and they're relying on our team to help them do their jobs better, it's that scientist or that researcher, or the person who is actually working in one of our manufacturing sites. And so, really, my priorities. Sometimes when I answer this question, people think that my priorities are mostly technical, and they are not. We look at the triad of people, process, and technology. And as technologists, of course, I love shiny objects. I love new things. I love to tinker with stuff. So I'm always going to go towards, let me just run towards this technology that we want to put in place. But what we have found is that if we don't have a good mix between people and process before we ever get to the technology, we will find ourselves enabling bad process, which will create bad behaviors in people, and we would just be forcing them into a certain technology because we didn't look at those two things first. So, really, what I believe the new age CISO should be focusing their energy on, as well as myself, is how do we look at the people impact? How do we look at the systems that they're using, but there's a person who is using that system? How do we look at the processes that need to be in place in order for us to have consistency and compliance, if you will? And then we start to look at how do we layer technology to enable our business and drive us to the future. So I really spend a lot of my energy in that people process side of the house. My goal is to shift behaviors. My goal is not to be a technologist in this role. My goal is to shift behavior. So if I want our workforce to engage with data, engage with systems, engage with all of the sensitive things that we have here at Lilly, if I want them to engage a different way, then I have to work on the hearts and minds of the people that I'm working with. And how do I get them to think differently about that? And that comes through training and awareness and education and discussions and allowing them to tell you what their pain points are so you can help them solve those problems before you just toss technology
And
at
I
them.
guess how do you handle that in the evolution that we're in today, which particularly in health, right? We've got the future of health, we've got
Mhm,
more automation, we've got more changes when we think about what the supply chain is in health. And so candidly, we're no longer, and haven't been for quite some time, dealing with people,
Mhm.
process, or technology within the same four walls. And so now, as you think
Mhm.
about what your quote unquote supply chain is, again, whether people, process, or
Mhm.
technology, how do you think about
Mhm.
that from a threat perspective? How do you think about that when you look at how do I get to these people to do training and awareness given the increase in digital awareness and automation across the board?
Mhm. Well, messaging and consistent messaging is always key, but it's back to the process. How you fix that and how you manage and monitor it is through the right processes. So when we think about the third parties that we engage with, which all healthcare organizations, whether you're on the life sciences side or the payer provider side of healthcare, we all have third parties that we do business with. And it's incumbent upon us to be clear on what our expectations are when we're partnering with someone outside of our organization. And not only do we have to be clear as we're assessing that relationship, we also have to be consistent in the way that we monitor the security posture of those third parties. That is going to be driven through process. Not necessarily through technology. So I think that you still can take one of those levers, if you will, and pull them when you're dealing with an ecosystem that's bigger than just our four walls. But the process is really what's going to drive that. Do you have a very strong assurance function that once you have gone through the assessments and you've provided feedback and maybe even a risk score and you have that third party that does some level of remediation, do you put them into some level of an audit cycle to assure you that the controls that you've put in place are required them to put in place as they deal with your ecosystem, and your data that's resident in the ecosystem, that the controls that you put in place are still there and they're still effective. So I really do believe that we sleep on a little bit of that process piece that it really will help us a lot of times when it comes to the fact that our four walls are bleeding into the world of IoT and all of these connected type devices. There's ways for us to be able to manage that, but I do think the process serves as a vehicle for that.
And I'd be interested, given that part of the conversation, what do you think is a person's people's impact in this? So, obviously with digitization, being in a digital world, we'll go that way.
Mhm.
What is all of our responsibility? So I don't know about you, but I love being online. I'm posting, shopping, doing my e-health. Obviously, as you think about that, I'm actually having appointments with doctors, virtually, which is a great phenomena that we have, particularly as fast as this world is
Mhm.
moving. What is my responsibility in that? What are our listeners' responsibility when you think about all the
Yeah.
data we're giving, whether virtual or online, and particularly as our adversaries are trying to get to this data at a much quicker and faster pace as well?
Yeah, I'm just going to use one answer to this. It's going to be kind of strange, but it's going to be a very simple one, and it's basically cyber hygiene. And I think that sometimes our hygiene is a little poor when it comes to the way that we engage in the digital world, and we have to have a personal level of how bad do we want to smell when we're out on the internet, so we have to really have some really good hygiene, and so there are things that are so basic to the way that we engage in these spaces, like change your password. Please, like, you don't have to have the same password that you've used for the last 5 years to continue to keep having that. That's a bad hygiene activity. So I think that we need to really focus as users on what is that hygiene standard for us. And let me just say this: the hygiene quotient, and I just made that up because that was not like a word,
I like
but the
it.
hy- but the hygiene quotient for most users changes based off of the generation that they're in. And so, depending on whether you are part of, say, our millennial generation, they live a little bit more out loud than we do. And so, from that regard, the whole point around privacy and the privacy of their data and things of that nature, it may not be that important to them, right? As it would be for someone like myself. So I think that we have to understand that the hygiene quotient is going to be different depending on where you sit and those things that you believe are important. But I think we all have to come up with what those principles are, whether it's not just advancing your next password by going from O1 to O2 to O3. We see people who do that a lot. Things like, are you storing your data in places where it could be accessible to that threat actor? Where are you putting it? Sometimes we think that just because we're sticking it in a cloud account, it's great. It depends on what type of cloud account you're sticking it into. Are you saving files within your email system? which I know a lot of people do that. They use their email as their filing cabinet. Probably not the best thing for you to do. So I think that there's a set of hygiene standards that we need to make sure that we're employing as users to kind of help share and move along this whole idea of how to stay protected and how to stay secure.
I mean, I love hygiene quotient. I think it's something that we can apply not only to individuals and people as they look at electronic health and where we are in today's day and age, but
Mhm.
also one example maybe you can also help our listeners maybe think about. I know obviously Eli Lilly recently acquired an organization, and when you're thinking about mergers or acquisitions, there's definitely a hygiene quotient with other organizations too. So how do you
Sure.
really think about that when you're absorbing the company? How do you think about that when you're looking at all the cyber considerations that you need in the process around systems integration, people integration, and process integration that candidly, maybe any one or all three of them don't mesh with one another?
Well, first, you have to be a part of the process. So I think that I've watched organizations sometimes bring in the security team at the end of the deal. So we've
Mm.
decided that we want to go ahead and we we want to acquire this company. Um, we really have really adopted an ugly baby, and we're just going to tell you about it at the last minute and see if you can clean it up. And I think that's where we kind of started when we started looking at mergers and acquisitions and divestitures and things of that nature. But I think that I'm watching organizations, and I know what we do here at Lilly is we make sure that we are a part of the beginning of the process as we are determining and really conducting our due diligence as it relates to a particular organization and doing those proper levels of assessments. I want to know everything I possibly can know about their security posture and allow that to be an input into the decision making and not just an afterthought. So, if you are an organization and you want to engage in this world of mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, um, you have to be able to make sure that you have all of the right information so you can make the most educated decision possible. If you're not pulling your security team in until you're almost about to sign and close the deal, then you're probably going to miss a lot and you might be inheriting some huge security problems for your organization, especially if you feel like you're not going to create any controls or segmentation between those two organizations, which I've watched that happen as well. Not necessarily here at Lilly, but I've watched it happen where we have brought a third party in and said, we're going to acquire this organization, we're going to connect our networks, zero trust, and we're basically going to allow free flowing of data between the two organizations without any assessment. Well, that doesn't make sense because how do you know that something might not be happening on that end that can now affect your entire ecosystem? So that assessment I can't underscore enough. Assessment, assessment, assessment. Use that data to be able to make those decisions and then to put some mitigation plans in place prior to deal close because you have the right to do that. In order for us to close this deal, you guys need to do X, Y, and Z. We need to see the security posture be this before you choose to engage with that third party or bring that third party underneath your umbrella. So here we have a very robust program around that, and I'm proud of the fact that we try to make sure that we're engaged at the right moment so we can provide that critical information to our executives as they're making decisions.
And I think I mean, your confidence in being able to ask those questions, even as I listen to you speak it,
Mhm.
is also very valuable. I think in this process, to your point of when you said, you're absolutely allowed to do X or you're absolutely allowed to ask Y, making sure
Mhm.
that you have that not only level of confidence, but that you're asking those questions so that you can get all the data and information you need to help understand what is the impact on your organization. To your point around assessments and understanding what that impact is, because I think sometimes people, to your point, wait till the last moment, cyber gets engaged, and then all of a sudden you've absorbed an organization or some processes or solutions or business units that, candidly, like I said, maybe don't mesh and you've not gotten ahead of it to understand what that impact is. So,
Yeah.
completely agree with the
Mhm.
points that you've made there. And I guess one of the things that is interesting, obviously, with the evolution of healthcare and the fact that you have seen the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry change
Mhm.
over the last several decades. Where do
Mhm.
you think it's going next? I mean, I like I said, I love the fact that I can get on my mobile device and I can connect with my
Mhm.
doctor and see their face and have conversations and get medical appointments. I know that they're not necessarily everybody loves that. People still love to go see doctors and sit in waiting rooms. I'm not one of them. And so, what do you think is coming next? I mean, where do you see the future of the industry going?
Yeah. So from a healthcare perspective, again, I have watched a lot shift and change, and as well am a person who actually likes to use my devices to be able to engage with my physician. I don't really like to go to doctors if I don't have to, and I think that that's going to continue to be a wave that we will see within the provider payer side of healthcare. Or the provider side, if you will, of healthcare. But what we will start to see, I believe, is more predictive and precision medicine. And I know that we hear those terms a lot about being able to get right at the core of what we're trying to treat versus having medicines and having treatments and treatment plans that do a ton and a myriad of things. We can really get to the core of what we're trying to get at. So that precision medicine and that predictive medicine using data, whether it's from a population health perspective and taking a look at how do we treat in a specific population or geography, utilizing data to make those decisions. I think we can see some of that probably in the near future. But I think really that whole mobile piece of it, and I think we're going to start seeing also us pulling away from the traditional hospital structure and starting to see more care pushed to these non-conventional spaces like outpatient facilities or your local CVS. The ability for people to go into an outpatient facility versus I'm just going to run up the street to the CVS and get my flu shot. I mean, the convenience of that all when you have a CVS every few miles sometimes is very appealing to people. So I think looking at care being delivered in these non-conventional ways, I think is really where we're going to see a difference from what we have today.
And I'm sitting over here smiling and like, yes, I was like, I love all the convenience of it. And so I
Yes.
think particularly the predictive
Mhm,
medicine, I mean, for
mhm,
us to be able to just get ahead of the challenges that so many people have
mhm.
today. And so predictive medicine, I'm certainly excited about that. I mean,
Sure.
we've even come a long way when you think about, I mean, the fact that you could swallow pills to get cameras in your body to look at the things that
Yes.
are going on, right? And where
Love it.
that's going to be headed. So I am super, super, super excited by that transition as well. And so now we're going to get into what I like to believe is my favorite part of the podcast, which is rapid fire questions. So
Okay.
doesn't mean you need to be quick on your answer, but just things that what's first that comes to your mind and things that
Okay.
you would want to share with the listeners. So
Sure.
one that I want to start with because again I think it's very much so part of your brand and I want the listeners to continue to hear your passion around it. I'm
Mhm,
proud to be a member of what I would call a beautiful mosaic that is Deloitte, where diversity is a focus on helping to bring different perspectives to the workplace, personally and professionally. And so maybe
mhm.
you could share a little bit around your perspectives on how we can continue to bring more diversity, not only into the world, candidly, but the work organization, technology background, cyber, but really how is diversity and inclusion so central to what you do every day?
Oh, it's absolutely central. So when I thought about the career that I've had and the opportunities that I've had to be able to show my organizations that it's possible to find women in this space, it's possible to find other minorities in this space versus us just taking the norm of what we would typically see specifically in the security space, I've loved that journey to be able to open up those doors for them. One of the things that I've always said, though, about diversity and inclusion, it's not easy because it's not always intuitive. If people are raised and socialized in a certain environment, they typically gravitate towards that. And I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think it's limiting at times because you don't get an opportunity to see other perspectives or hear other perspectives. So what I've attempted to do, and I think it had a lot to do with the way that I was raised and socialized, especially being in a church community. We engaged with everybody. So it wasn't really about race. Wasn't really about gender or culture or anything like that. We engaged with everyone. And so I bring that same perspective into my work environment where I want to see a team that represents the population in which we serve. So if we're not just serving one demographic, then why does my team only reflect one demographic? I needed to actually reflect the entire rainbow, as you say. You guys have at Deloitte. So it's a huge part of my mission professionally as well as personally to make sure that we're offering not just diversity in the pure senses of what we typically see diversity as male, female, Caucasian, African American. Those are the typical terms that we see. But diversity plays a beautiful song underneath when you get diversity of thought. It's beautiful when you have diversity of experiences, um, diversity of socialization. Like all of these things play out as you're making decisions as an organization, as my teams are brainstorming. I'm watching them bring different concepts to the table that are typically a part of how they were socialized. And so I wouldn't have that if I just, again, focused on just one demographic. So I get this amazing opportunity to come to Lilly and continue to do that same type of work where I want to see women represented in this space. I want to see young people represented in this space. I want to see those of us who are more seasoned um, represented in this space. We all bring something different to the table. And so I continue to make sure that that is a part of my recruitment strategies. It's a part of my socialization outside of Lilly when I'm talking to teen groups or if I'm talking to college students. I'm always talking about the diverse workforce and what that brings to the table for us as an organization and the power that's behind that. So it's
I'm writing
incredibly
down your
important.
slogans. No, so in addition to hygiene quotient from earlier, I've got diversity is a beautiful song, which is, I mean, again, I'm thinking to myself, she's 100% right. Like between the different types of notes, and you've got acapellas. I mean, there's all kinds of things
Yes.
that you can have in the beauty of song, and so it's a very wonderful quote. You probably didn't even know you were saying it when it was coming out, but I was writing it
It,
down and I'm repeating it for our listeners because it's amazing.
awesome.
Um, One thing that's, again, as I listen to your passion, I would love some insight. Who do you look up to? I mean, you've mentioned the
Mhm,
educators, you've mentioned your parents. I mean, is there
mhm,
any particular leader that you look up to, and maybe
mhm.
some insight into why?
Yeah. I would have to say right off the bat, Mary Alice Anacarico. This woman is absolutely amazing. She is the former CIO of Henry Ford Health System. And the reason why she was so important in my career journey, she was the first woman I have ever reported to in my career. And I didn't report to a woman until 2012. So I had been in my career since the early 90s and had never reported to a woman. So to see her as the CIO of this organization and to be able to be mentored by her and coached by her, and most importantly, sponsored by her, it was just an amazing experience. And she's retired now, but she's still a great friend. She's still a great mentor. Even to this day, when I have questions around certain things, I will give her a call and say, okay, Mary Alice, here's the deal. Now tell me what I'm supposed to do here. And she has such thoughtful advice and such a breadth of experience. And the interesting thing about her is she's a nurse actually who became a CIO years and years and years ago. And for her to bring that nursing skill and that care and compassion into the work that we do, where we are the technologists and we like data and devices and Mountain Dew, she gave us the ability to kind of merge these things together and really brought the care and compassion into the work that we did from an IT perspective. And so I have a great and tremendous amount of respect for her. I can say that another leader would be Nancy Schlichting. I mean, again, Nancy Schlichting. She's the previous CEO of Henry Ford Health System. This woman has no fear. She has no fear whatsoever in terms of her standing on her principles and being able to say, if I'm going to be in these spaces, I have to see change. I have to see us evolve. I have to see us tackle the hard things. And I've watched her do that the 16 years or so that she was the CEO of Henry Ford Health System. So those have been two leaders that have really embraced me, helped me, supported me outside of the normal family and things of that nature. So I have such a rate of gratitude for them because of that.
Well, I certainly am incredibly grateful for you spending some time with me today to be able to share all of these experiences. I have
Mhm.
one last question that I like to ask, and I
Sure.
don't like to ask, how do you define success? I think we have enough pressure in the world today to put ourselves in a box. So I don't
Yeah.
I don't believe in asking that question. But how would you put yourself out there and say, this is me again? I've got so much from this podcast that I could probably share, and I will, in terms of just sharing my experience of hearing your experience. But how would you put yourself out there and say, Meredith Harper is what?
Forever changing.
Wonderful. I seriously, I've written every one of your anecdotes down, and I
Oh my
love
gosh.
forever changing. Life is an
Yeah,
evolution,
it
certainly
is.
is an evolution. And again, I am humbled and grateful for you being able to
Mm,
share your time with me today and being able to share this with our listeners. So, first and foremost, thank you for being you,
mm.
and thank you for being transparent with your experience. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. I so enjoyed this, and I hope that anything and something that I said helped or supports anybody who's in their journey. So I'm excited about this. This was awesome.
I have to say, I don't know about each of you, but I enjoyed that conversation immensely. Listening to Meredith's passion is absolutely fantastic. And not only her passion, but I was seriously writing down all her anecdotes about having a higher purpose and that we all have a responsibility on this journey, not just by ourselves, but to be able to help others. Hearing a strong woman's perspective is incredibly empowering to me as I sat and listened. And I hope that each of you also enjoyed listening to her journey not only from a technical perspective, but really her passion around people. I think that resonated throughout the conversation from the early days of her parents to educators to going and getting a law degree in the health environment, truly showcases how her own journey has been embodied by the education system and the support that she's got along the way. I think the other thing that I enjoyed listening to is learning from our own mistakes, allowing individuals to turn into their best versions of themselves, and using that as part of the way to form their journey. So if you've liked what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders. Be sure to check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at deloitte.com/us/resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. And be sure to ask me what that means. I'll be happy to share. Once again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time today.